But we do have to begin with the breaking news on the partial government shutdown, with President Trump now trying to bypass Congress and unilaterally fund TSA as congressional gridlock threatens to extend the shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security and the historic travel chaos at airports all across the country. The president officially delivering that order after Speaker Mike Johnson rejected a deal that Senate Republicans passed overnight with Democratic support that would have funded the TSA and most of DHS, but not ICE or Border Patrol. Speaker Johnson instead is going to have the House vote to fund all of DHS for 60 days, including ICE and Border Patrol. The move essentially ensures more gridlock, but Speaker Johnson telling reporters his plan has the president's support.
This gambit that was done last night is a joke. We're going to put a clean, simple, continuing resolution that will go until May 22nd. It's just a number of weeks to allow for all those who sacrificially serve the country and protect other Americans. All these agencies, 10 agencies under the Department of Homeland Security, will continue at their current funding levels to make sure that they are protected. We're not playing political games on this. We encourage some of our Democrats, hopefully we'll have some of our Democrats in the House who go along with this and stop the pain that's being forced upon these people. I spoke to the president a few moments ago. He understands exactly what we're doing and why, and he supports it.
Now, the Speaker's pitch comes after House conservatives expressed outrage over the Senate deal.
It is absolutely offensive to the people that we represent that the Senate would send over a bill that doesn't fund Border Patrol and the core components of ICE. I mean, could the Senate be any more lazy than to send to us a bill that doesn't do the job and then leave town? So we're going to stand up and say no to that.
Bottom line is, this deal is bad for America. It's bad for Americans. The president has already said he's going to fund TSA out of funds he has. So it's not going to affect the airports if we don't do this today.
Democratic leadership says they will not support the House's new plan, calling it dead on arrival in the Senate. It comes as frustration and long lines persist at the nation's airports, with the rate of TSA officer callouts reaching its highest point of the shutdown yesterday, surpassing 30% at 5 major airports. Joining me now is our NBC News team chief Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles, White House correspondent Monica Alba, senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley, and national correspondent Aaron Gilchrist is on the ground in Atlanta at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. Thanks to all of you for starting us off on this developing story. Ryan, we just heard a defiant Speaker Johnson saying House Republicans are going to reject the deal the Senate unanimously passed last night. Take us inside Johnson's thinking and the pressure that he's getting from the House Freedom Caucus.
Well, we've entered new legislative territory here, Kristen, and I'm not sure exactly how we get out of it. I think what we've seen established here between the House and Senate is that there isn't a piece of legislation that could get the 60 votes in the Senate necessary to open the Department of Homeland Security, and we could be in a ping-pong battle between the House and the Senate for an indefinite amount of time. This is what we know for sure. John Thune and Mike Johnson spoke last night at 3 a.m. when the Senate decided to take this route of passing the majority of the Department of Homeland Security budget, save for Customs and Border Patrol and ICE. Something happened this morning when Mike Johnson came into this chamber and had conversations with his conservative rank and file that made him think that it was a no-go, that they weren't going to get it done. But every time you talk to either a Republican or Democrat about this, they blame the other side. They say the other side is at fault here. And at some point, someone's going to have to stand up and present some leadership to try and find a way out of this. And I asked Speaker Johnson about that today, and this is his response.
The American people are just sick and tired of every one of you, both Republicans and Democrats, come to this podium and blame the other side. People have been standing in lines 3, 4, 5 hours at a time. There's TSA workers that are selling their plasma. At what point is a leader on either side going to stand up and say, we have a path forward that everyone will agree to? This vote today will extend the shutdown under any circumstance.
No, it won't. No, it won't. Thank you. Let me answer the question. I'm glad you brought it up. The House Republicans have now voted that today will be the 4th time to fund the Homeland Security. This is not party blame game. This is a record. You can hold up the record. Look at the Democrats. They're voting over and over. Yesterday afternoon, we gave them a chance to fund Homeland Security. You know how many House Democrats voted yes? 4 of them. They want to use people as pawns.
So the sum total of all of this, Kristen, is that this shutdown is going to continue. I spoke to a gentleman who was in line at an airport in Houston to fly to Dallas. He got to the end of the line. He actually had to take a train to get to the end of the security line. When he got there, the folks in line told him it was at least a 4-hour wait. It was easier for him just to drive to Dallas as opposed to wait in that line. There are stories like that all over the country. Obviously, these TSA officers are being forced to make difficult choices. And the one other point I would make about this, Kristen, is yes, the president's emergency executive order could get money in the paychecks of TSA officers as soon as Monday. But what about FEMA, frontline FEMA workers? What about folks that work in cybersecurity? What about the resources that are necessary for the Coast Guard? All of that funding still remains up in the air. And here on Capitol Hill, there is no solution to get us to the point where all of that can be rectified.
And Ryan, I think your question to Speaker Johnson was so poignant and right on target. Americans are outraged by the finger pointing. They want this crisis to come to an end. Let's talk about Democrats. They had a number of demands on ICE reforms that they wanted in that Senate bill. They didn't get any of that. They did get Republicans in the Senate to agree to pass a bill that did not include ICE funding. Do they feel like they're winning this issue or losing because they didn't get the changes that they wanted to see?
I think that the outcome that we saw last night in the Senate was the outcome that Democrats were looking for very early on in this process. They had offered a bill very similar to this, which removed all of the funding for ICE and CBP and funded the rest of the Department of Homeland Security to give the opportunity to negotiate these issues going down the road. But Democrats also need a bit of a reality check here. The Republicans are not going to bend on some of these things that they're begging for, masks in particular. That is a red line that Republicans have said that they're not going to cross. And there have been changes that Democrats have gained through this process. Kristi Noem is no longer the Secretary of Homeland Security. They've ended, for the most part, these roving patrols in places like Minneapolis. There is a commitment to TSA or ICE officers wearing body cams in the near future. They're rolling that policy out soon. So it's not as if nothing came out of this back and forth. So that's why, again, I get back to this idea of leaders on both sides need to recognize the reality of where we are in, how angry and upset the American people are, and find a path to a solution, which just still seems to be impossible to find.
Well, great job on holding their feet to the fire on Capitol Hill, Ryan Nobles. Thank you so much for joining us as we enter yet another weekend with this shutdown ongoing. Monica, Alba, I turn to you at the White House. So the president, for his part, has now issued basically a presidential memorandum that would unilaterally fund TSA. This comes after he spoke to House Speaker Mike Johnson. Johnson says he would, in fact, support the short-term CR. What are you hearing there, Mon?
Yeah, Kristen, the president kind of previewed this yesterday in that cabinet meeting, saying that if Congress couldn't come up with some kind of deal, that the White House would take some, quote, drastic measures. They discussed a number of ideas, and this was one of them, which is basically to take the unspent funds that still exist within the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill, which passed last year, and use them to pay TSA workers, it looks like starting on Monday, for all of their back pay during this latest shutdown and benefits that they are owed. There were some questions about logistically exactly how that works, but the administration has dipped into these kinds of discretionary funds before. Remember when they wanted to pay the military and active duty troops back in the last very lengthy shutdown as well. That's kind of the mechanism that they use. So the president announced this for the first time last night, and then now today we have confirmed he actually did sign that presidential memo that you just referenced, but it doesn't deal with this larger issue. And the president just spoke to a reporter from Fox News and said and criticized the Senate version, saying that he didn't believe it was appropriate what was passed overnight. So you did have Speaker Johnson indicating that the president, quote, understands the path that he is now taking. But the president and the White House and sources that I've been talking to all afternoon say, look, the president can't deal with this until it kind of gets to him. And he is letting lawmakers on Capitol Hill figure it out before he weighs in. But we have always talked about this, Kristen, this idea of how involved the president is going to be in trying to get to an ending. And the other question here that the White House hasn't really addressed is if they had this in their power to pay the TSA workers, again, unilaterally, as he is doing, why didn't they do that sooner? Why didn't they do that weeks ago when we really started to hear some of these really awful stories from the TSA workers that are affected?
Absolutely, Monica. And I have to ask you, I mean, could there potentially be legal challenges to this unilateral move by President Trump?
Well, look, I think that it is possible, but it wouldn't be maybe very popular for somebody to want to essentially say that these TSA workers shouldn't be paid, those who are selling their plasma, who are having their cars repossessed, who are really facing these really difficult challenges. And the agency itself, as we know, is facing this massive shortage overall in their workforce. And there are real alarm bells about how they're going to be able to get some of those people back. More than 510 have quit, and they really need to be trained for months before recruiting any new possible workers and officers, and that already is going to be a very, very complicated challenge. So I think potentially arguing that these TSA workers shouldn't be paid is something that maybe, even if it does have legal standing, is not something that a group would want to take up. Kristen.
All right. Monica Alba at the White House, thank you for bringing us all of your reporting, all of your source conversations. We really appreciate it. Julia, let me turn to you. Extraordinary how this is all playing out. The fact that the shutdown is ongoing. There's this last-minute glitch we're seeing in the House. So Monica just laid out the fact that President Trump is going to unilaterally try to pay TSA workers. They could get those first paychecks, some of them as soon as Monday. How does this work, Julia? Is everyone going to get paid on Monday?
Well, they're going to begin processing them, and we understand some will be paid as early as Monday. It could be that it just takes longer to process everyone's, but they will start on Monday. They won't have to wait until the next pay cycle to get paid. But I really like the point that Ryan brought up, that DHS is far more than TSA. We're talking about the ability to respond to natural disasters like FEMA, to be able to get grants out to local organizations that are dealing with those disasters, the Coast Guard, people who process visas for legal immigration. A lot of that is fee-based, but a lot of that are people who depend on Congress to pass a budget and to fund them. So it's not just TSA, even though that's kind of the tip of the spear and what a lot of Americans are dealing with, people who every day don't have a lot of interactions with DHS. But funding TSA does not end this problem. And of course, the House version of this would have carved out and made an exception not to pay, the Senate version, not to pay CBP and ICE.
Well, let me ask you and follow up with you on that point. Do CBP and ICE actually have funding right now because of the Big Beautiful Bill?
So in short, yes, most of them do. What the Big Beautiful Bill did, though, is it made a special provision of how the money would be used. And so it put $45 billion just into ICE detention, $35 billion into ICE recruitment and to pay people who came to work for ICE. It's how they were offering $50,000 signing bonuses while TSA workers aren't getting paid. It seems crazy, but they had very specific purposes. Then there are some people who fall through the cracks who are not law enforcement personnel, who do work for CBP and ICE, who don't carry badges and guns and do a lot of the processing that makes the immigration process work, including people working in customs. And so those are the people who could potentially fall through the cracks. And I've been going to DHS today to say, what will you do about those people if the Senate bill is the one that sticks? And so far, they aren't even playing in the world of that being a reality, that the Senate bill will be what they need to respond to. They're just focused on the TSA emergency and really blaming Democrats for an ongoing shutdown. But they did say, Mark Wayne Mullen, of course, applauds the president and this move for the TSA workers getting paid.
All right. Well, we will continue to track it. I know you will continue to track these payments. Julia Ainsley, thank you so much. Great to see you as always. Aaron Gilchrist, let me head out to you. What are you hearing from TSA and airport officials amid this back and forth in Washington?
You know, I spoke to one TSA union leader here at the Atlanta airport, and he said that he came into today with cautious optimism. He heard what the president said yesterday, posted yesterday about paying TSA workers. He saw the Senate vote early this morning and was hopeful, he said, about what was going to be coming. But the reality, as you noted, as your other correspondents have been noting, things seem to have fallen apart at this point in terms of what it's going to take to make permanent funding for the Department of Homeland Security and salaries for TSA officers and others that are a part of that department. We asked him about the idea of what happens going forward as well. And he says that because we've got more than 500 TSA officers who have resigned from their positions, he's fearful about the future because he says the damage may have already been done. Listen.
You know, I usually have 18 people working for me. So during these shutdown days, some days I have 2, sometimes I have 3. So think about it. So what happened to the other 15 or 14 people? I don't know. I haven't seen them. So I don't know if other people, they may have taken positions, gone somewhere else. So we truly won't know the true impact, how many people coming back until, a couple days until when this settles in.
Now, I also spoke to a union leader who covers the Louisiana-Mississippi area, airports down there, and she said that the uncertainty of dealing with the federal government at this point is something that is pushing people out of jobs for the TSA. They don't know when the next government shutdown is going to come and how long that may last and how long they may have to go without pay. And even though we're talking now about TSA officers being paid as early as next week, getting that back pay as early as next week, they'll be due another paycheck in 2 weeks. And there's no guarantee that DHS will be funded in that time period so that they get the next paycheck, which puts them right back where they are today, Kristen.
Well, you can just feel the anger mounting as this drags on. Aaron Gilchrist, thank you so much.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.